What if some of America's most beloved foods were born from scraps handed to enslaved black families? By 1860, nearly 4 million people were enslaved in the United States, creating wealth while surviving on cornmeal, bones, and whatever could be stretched across another meal. Yet those same ingredients later became Southern tradition, restaurant profit, and flavors white America learned to crave. Why does America remember the crispy crust, smoky broth, and rich gravy, but forget the black hands that made them possible? This is Hidden Black Chronicles, and together we bring buried stories back into the light. Today we uncover 10 foods enslaved black people shaped from scraps that white America later celebrated and sold. Number 1. Chitterlings, chitlins. Long before stewed or fried chitterlings were served in restaurants, at festivals, or during family reunions, they were among the least valued parts of the hog on southern plantations. For an enslaved black family, the intestines the big house did not want might become a rare evening meal with meat, something small for the children, or the last food left to help a household make it through another exhausting week. Interviews collected by the Federal Writers Project during the 1930s show that pork held an important place in the diets and daily lives of many formerly enslaved communities. Yet the way the animal was divided depended on the power of the plantation owner. The cleaner cuts, the pieces that kept well, and the meat that could be sold were usually claimed first, while the intestines, feet, ears, head, skin, and bones with little meat might be sent down to the quarters. By 1860, nearly 4 million people remained enslaved in the United States. In a system where food was measured mainly to keep a body alive and working, even the part of the hog others did not want could become deeply precious. But chitterlings did not simply become a dish people looked forward to. Each length had to be turned inside out, carefully cleaned, washed again and again, soaked, and placed in fresh water before it could be cooked slowly for hours. If the family had managed to save a little onion, vinegar, pepper, or hot pepper, those ingredients could soften the smell and give the pot its own flavor. Behind every plate of tender chitterlings or crisp golden pieces were water, firewood, time, and hands that had worked far longer than any future diner would ever see. Enslaved black people were not the first people in the world to eat hog intestines, because organ meats had long existed in many food traditions. But in the American South, they shaped a distinct way of preparing and seasoning them from the very parts others left behind. Across generations, chitterlings came to mean more than hunger. They carried the image of a mother standing over the pot, children waiting near the stove, and those rare moments when a family could gather around the fire together. What had once been treated as one of the least valuable parts of the animal became a dish their descendants continued to remember, prepare, and return to during family gatherings.
Some folks
After
drowned their
slavery
chitlins in
ended,
it. Others
chitterlings
just dabbed.
traveled with black families
Are
into
known
new
as chitlins,
neighborhoods,
or
churches,
pig
restaurants,
intestines.
and holiday reunions.
But they've never, if
Over
Africans
time,
were
the
given the
dish
feet,
became more
the
than
snouts,
food for
the
surviving
ears,
scarcity.
and some
It
folks
became
hum
something
while they
that called
stir.
people back to their
Others sip a
mothers,
drink,
their
tell
grandmothers,
stories. You're
and
either in the chitlin
steam-filled
club
kitchens
or
of
you're not.
childhood. Stores began selling cleaned intestines. Restaurants placed them on menus, and local festivals drew white visitors who had once known the dish only through ridicule or contempt. By 1824, recipes for preparing hog entrails had already appeared in the Virginia Housewife, one of the South's earliest and most influential cookbooks. The book preserved the recipe, but the hands that helped shape its flavor were largely left unnamed. During the Jim Crow era, the dish even lent its name to the Chitlin Circuit, the network of theaters and clubs that supported black entertainers, when many white venues still turned them away. Then, in 1966, the town of Sally, South Carolina, began holding an annual festival devoted to chitterlings. Visitors, including white guests, came to stand in line, eat, and celebrate the same food that had once been dismissed as poor people's fare. The intestines, once sent down to the quarters because they were worth less than the meat reserved for the big house, eventually entered cookbooks, restaurants, festivals, and the wider culture of the United States. Black families did more than keep a discarded part of the hog from going to waste. Through
Today at
patience,
Scope News, we are
skill,
going to
and
be
memory,
talking about one
they
pot.
turned it into a dish that even
The
those
pot.
who once looked down
Americans,
on it
chitlins
would
were
later
never
pay
just
to
about taste.
If
Some
something
people
once
use
treated
salt,
as scraps
some
could
use
become a
vinegar,
flavor America
others
learned to
swear by
crave.
lemon juice.
How many
It's
celebrated
about
dishes on
lineage.
today's table
It's about
began
the
with
choice,
what
the scent
enslaved
of
black
poverty,
people were forced to make
of
do
having
with.
no options, of being handed the worst, and
Number 2. Pig feet and souse. In 1881, Abby Fisher, a woman born into slavery in South Carolina, published What Mrs. Fisher Knows About Old Southern Cooking. Fisher could neither read nor write, so she recited each recipe from memory, while others wrote her words down. Among the dishes she preserved was a recipe for pickled pig's feet.
a floral house dress carefully plates the meat, still glistening,
far removed from the
They were
cleaner
survival
pieces served
food,
at the
born in the
enslaver's
worst
table.
conditions.
Long before Abby Fisher's name appeared in print, generations of black women had learned how to work with the parts that demanded the most labor before they could be eaten. Pig's feet had to be scraped, carefully washed, and cooked for
I then
hours
put water
until the
into the
skin
pot so that it
softened.
covers knife and
connective
put into
tissue
that meat
loosened,
to ensure
and
that
the
it is
broth
nice
began to
and
thicken.
soft.
With vinegar, pepper,
Now
onion,
here I am
or
using
whatever
some
herbs could be
chives,
spared.
some
They
we
turned
then
those
just
feet
add
into
all
a
of our
deeply
pig feet
seasoned stew
pieces in
or a
time,
pickled dish
putting
known
about
as
a
souse.
teaspoon to two.
A pig's foot held very little
That
weight,
is sea
but
salt.
with enough patience, its
Salt,
skin,
it does need
marrow,
some more
and
salt.
broth could
So I'm going to
become
adjust the
something
salt
rich
on
and
that.
deeply
I'm going to
satisfying.
add the other.
Unlike hog intestines, the hardest part of preparing a pig's feet was not always the cleaning. It was waiting. The fire had to remain steady for hours,
Pot with
even
enough
when
water in
firewood
it to
was
cover
limited,
the trotters.
and the
Now, you
cook had
can see
already spent the day
we're going to
working.
get this fire going
A
on
mother might
about a
leave the
minute.
pot simmering through the
Season
night so that,
our
by
pig's
morning,
feet. Continue to
the
boil
toughest parts
until
had softened
the
enough
bones
for
are
children
literally
and elders to
falling off. I want
eat.
this meat.
After the Civil War, Abby Fisher carried that knowledge to San Francisco, where she built a business selling pickles, sauces, and preserved foods. In 1879 and 1880, her products won awards at California fairs. A woman who had once been denied the opportunity to learn how to read now stood before judges who recognized the very skills she had carried out of Southern kitchens. When Fisher's recipe for pickled pig's feet appeared under her own name, the dish began moving beyond the oral memory of black families. In later years, jars of pickled pig's feet appeared in grocery stores, while stewed pig's feet found a place in Southern diners, restaurants, and family gatherings. White customers also came looking for the tender skin, rich broth, and sharp, savory flavor that made the dish so distinctive. The pig's feet once sent down to the quarters because they were considered less valuable than the cuts reserved for the big house. Eventually helped a black woman win awards, build a business, and place her own name on a cookbook. America kept the flavor, but the deeper story belongs to the woman who looked at skin, bone, and scraps others had dismissed, and saw a meal, a profession, and a path towards standing on her own 2 feet. And if black cooks could turn a cut made mostly of skin, tendon, and bone into food, white customers would later seek out and pay for. What happened when the next thing handed down was little more than neck bones with a few scraps of meat still clinging to them? Stay with us for the next chapter. Number 3. Neck bones and gravy. Today, in many soul food restaurants
So once
across
that's
the
in there, I'm
South,
going to
a
add just
plate
not
of
all of
slow-cooked
them. I'm
neck
using
bones
frozen
can
neck
still
bones
make
that
people
I
wait
actually
just
all
for the
that
smell
stuff
of the
that should not
gravy
be
drifting
there.
out from the kitchen.
The next step I do,
The small
I'm going to
pieces
start
of meat
adding
clinging to the
in
bone
my
are
neck
cooked
bones,
until
okay?
tender,
So we
while the broth
sprinkle in some
thickens
black
into gravy
pepper.
and is
The
poured over
rosemary
rice, beans, or
seasoning
cornbread.
salt already has.
But if we trace that plate back far enough, we find that the dish did not begin with abundance. It began with bones that had already been stripped of the best cuts. By 1860, nearly 4 million people remained enslaved in the United States. On many plantations, their rations were built around cheap, easy-to-measure foods such as cornmeal, salted pork, or dried fish. Interviews collected by the Federal Writers Project in the 1930s preserved the memories of more than 2,000 formerly enslaved people, many of whom recalled having to make use of nearly every part left behind in order to stretch meals that were already far too small. Neck bones were not completely useless, but there was little meat around each joint. Only scraps of fat, connective tissue, and marrow deep inside. The cleaner cuts had already been reserved for the big house or set aside for storage, while the bones that took more work and offered less meat were sent down to the quarters. From a table, with more than enough food, they may have looked like nothing but hard bones. To a mother waiting for her children to come home after a long day of labor, they could still become supper. That knowledge was rarely written into fine cookbooks. It moved from one kitchen to another through sight, sound, and practice, knowing when to add another piece of wood, when to lower the fire, and how to keep the broth from cooking away before the meat had softened. Black women learned how to pull deep flavor from bones that looked almost bare, even though they had no power to decide which part of the animal would be left for their own families. After slavery, neck bones traveled with black families into new neighborhoods, church kitchens, and southern restaurants. Today, they are still sold at butcher counters, cooked with beans, potatoes, or collard greens, and placed on menus as a dish that tastes like home. White diners who once saw those bones as hardly worth saving now seek them out for the thick gravy-rich flavor and tender meat that only comes after hours of slow cooking. In the past, those bones were sent down after the better cuts had already gone to the big house. Years later, the flavor drawn from those same scraps became something people would pay for, wait for, and wipe clean from the plate. Number 4. Collard greens with ham hocks. Long after slavery had ended, George Strickland could still remember black children eating cooked greens and potlikker from wooden troughs. They used their hands, seashells, or pieces of gourd carved into rough spoons. Back then, the broth at the bottom of the pot was simply the last thing available to soften dry cornbread and make it easier to swallow. Yet, only a few generations later, that same broth would have newspaper editors, politicians, and American food lovers debating the proper way to eat it. Enslaved Africans did not create the collard plant, but they carried with them generations of knowledge about growing and cooking leafy greens. They knew how to soften tough leaves, how to season a large pot with only a small piece of meat, and how to save the broth so it could feed more people. In 1781, Lieutenant William Feltman passed through Hanover County, Virginia, and recorded that black people there were growing large amounts of collards and snap beans. He noticed the thriving rows of vegetables, but the names of the people who planted, watered, harvested, and cooked them never made it into his account. For families whose rations were controlled by enslavers, collard greens offered a dependable source of food. The plants could withstand cold weather, keep producing leaves for weeks, and fill a large cast iron pot.
I'm going to show you how to make some real deal authentic soul food collard greens until my ham hocks are cooked to my preference. Meanwhile, a couple more hours, and this was my finished look.
This southern-style collard green cornbread
helped turn a thin meal into something that could carry a family.
Although learning how to make collard...
By 1931, potlikker had suddenly become a subject of national newspaper attention. Editor Julian Harris and Louisiana Governor Huey Long helped turn the proper way to eat potlikker with cornbread into a public debate that lasted about 23 days. Long later brought the dish into the United States Senate dining room and praised it before some of the most powerful men in the country. The broth once used to soften cornbread for enslaved children had reached the dining room of the United States Senate. Today, chefs such as Carla Hall and J.J. Johnson continue to build modern dishes around potlikker.
Now, if you want the exact measurements, the cooking time, favorite part is the potlikker.
George Strickland understood the value of that food when he was still a child beside a wooden trough, long before America decided the flavor was worthy of celebration. Number 5. Cornbread. Today, Americans can argue for hours over a single pan of cornbread, whether Southern cornbread should be sweet or savory, whether it belongs in a cast iron skillet or a baking pan, and just how crisp the edges are supposed to be. But long before families defended their recipes with pride, cornbread was handed out because it was cheap, kept well, and could hold a laborer on their feet for a few more hours in the field. Corn did not begin on the plantation. Generations before European settlers took the land, indigenous communities already knew how to grow it, dry it, grind it, and cook it in many different forms. Plantation owners later saw something else in cornmeal. It was easy to measure into rations, required little storage, and could be carried over long distances. Frederick Douglass recalled that on Edward Lloyd's plantation in Maryland, enslaved workers sometimes had to walk 2 or 3 miles just to reach the fields. Their midday meal might be nothing more than a corn cake, baked in hot ashes, served with a small piece of pork or 2 salted herrings. Nearby, black cooks were using butter, cream, poultry, and seafood to prepare full tables for the enslaver's family. Even that simple bread demanded labor. Someone still had to grind the corn, gather wood, build the fire, and mix the dough after a day that had already taken nearly everything out of them. In an 1838 account, One man escaping slavery remembered falling asleep before he could make his bread, then going to the field the next morning, carrying uncooked kernels. One night of exhaustion could cost a person the next day's meal. In 1866, Melinda Russell, a free black woman from Tennessee, published a cornbread recipe using eggs, sour milk, lard, and flour in a cookbook that carried her own name. A ration once made from little more than meal and water gradually took on butter, milk, sugar, and cracklings, then found its way beside barbecue, stewed greens, and holiday turkey. White America later learned to crave the hot golden crust, the smell of butter, and the soft center. Yet that bread was not originally made to bring comfort. It once helped enslaved people endure hunger, while richer food was being served inside another house. Number 6. Hoppin. John. Every New Year's Day, many American families still eat Hoppin' John in the hope that the peas will bring money and the rice will welcome a more prosperous year. Yet this dish, now tied to good fortune, took shape in the Carolina Lowcountry, where enslaved Africans created enormous wealth through rice cultivation while being denied wages, land, and any control over the harvest their own labor produced. Many West African communities already carried generations of knowledge about growing rice, cooking cowpeas, and bringing grains and beans together in one pot. When Africans were forcibly brought to Carolina, that knowledge traveled with them into the flooded rice fields. The harvest filled warehouses, moved through ports, and enriched plantation families. Back in the quarters, however, rice was often cooked with dried peas and a small piece of salted pork, barely enough to season food for an entire household. On the enslaver's table, rice was a commodity that could be turned into mansions, influence, and political power. In an enslaved family's bowl, those same grains had to absorb every trace of fat and salt, so a limited meal could stretch across more mouths. Dried peas kept well, while one small piece of pork could simmer until its flavor reached the entire pot. Black cooks were not working with abundance. They simply understood how to make what little they had carry a family farther. By 1838, Hoppin' John had appeared in print as a flavorful dish that was still considered too humble for an elegant table. In 1847, Sarah Rutledge included a recipe made with rice, peas, and bacon in the Carolina Housewife. Her name appeared beside the dish in print, even though black Lowcountry families had been preparing and preserving it long before the recipe entered her cookbook. In 1895, visitors were served Hoppin' John at the Atlanta Exposition. By 1909, President William Howard Taft was eating it during a visit to Charleston. A bowl that had once helped black families stretch scarce food was now being placed before tourists and a president of the United States.
This is what I'm gonna debut it with. And listen, it's not a whole lot of ingredients. Before I put my liquid in, you know what I mean? I do it like this, so this can absorb and bring my broth in.
Became a symbol of prosperity, even though the people whose labor helped build the wealth of the Lowcountry.
Okay, so you look at that right there, folks.
Had to keep their own families
I want you guys to let me know down
with those same humble ingredients.
Hey, welcome to
Number 7. Gumbo. Could a pot of food frighten the authorities enough to trigger an interrogation? In Louisiana in 1764, the answer was yes, because the black people gathered around that pot of gumbo were meeting beyond the control of their enslavers. On September 4th, Mama Julie Comba, an enslaved African woman, was questioned by New Orleans authorities about gatherings attended by black people who belonged to different enslavers. In the official record, they wrote the phrase, "un gumbo," and what troubled them was not the recipe. It was the fact that people whom the law had deliberately separated could still sit together, share food, exchange news, and maintain connections of their own. Across generations, gumbo absorbed Native American sassafras powder, European roux-making techniques, Gulf Coast seafood, Caribbean influences, and the skill of black Creole cooks. Eventually, it entered New Orleans cookbooks and elegant restaurants, where diners came seeking the deep layered broth that had once helped families stretch scarce ingredients across more bowls. In 2004, Louisiana officially recognized gumbo as the state's signature dish. More than 2 centuries earlier, authorities had watched black people gather around a shared pot. Later, the state would celebrate that same food as a source of cultural pride. America preserved the flavor, while Mama Comba's name remained almost forgotten inside an interrogation record. Number 8. Fried chicken. Whenever the train stopped in Gordonsville, Virginia, black women hurried along the platform, carrying baskets of fried chicken that were still hot. They had only a few minutes to sell food through the train windows, but every coin they earned could become flour, rent money, or one more day with less dependence on someone else. Bella Winston recalled that her mother saved the money she earned from selling fried chicken legs and used it to buy a home. For a black woman who had only recently emerged from slavery, that house meant far more than property. It gave her family a place to live without asking a landlord's permission, and it proved that hands once forced to serve others could now begin building a future of their own. Years later, America carried that same food into restaurants, advertisements, and multi-million-dollar brands. At the same time, Jim Crow culture used images of black people eating fried chicken to mock and degrade them. The country craved a flavor preserved by the hands of black women, then tried to turn their pride in that food into shame. But the Winston family home still stands as an answer. Those fried chicken legs were never a punchline. They became wages, independence, and a doorway into a life their family could finally choose for themselves. Number 9. Brunswick stew. Virginia and Georgia have argued for years over where Brunswick stew was born. Yet beneath the historical markers, commemorative pots, and local pride, the name most easily left behind belongs to the black man who stood over the fire. According to the story preserved in Brunswick County, Virginia, around 1828, Jimmy Matthews, an enslaved cook, accompanied a hunting party led by Dr. Creed Haskins, working with squirrel meat, onions, butter, stale bread, and whatever else was available. Matthews prepared a thick stew large enough to feed the entire group. Over time, chicken replaced wild game, while corn, beans, and tomatoes found their way into the pot. Scattered ingredients became a hot, deeply flavored meal that could sustain many people. Brunswick stew eventually spread through southern fairs, barbecue gatherings, and restaurants. White diners came for its smoky flavor, tender meat, and thick, rich broth. Two states still compete to claim the birthplace of the dish, but history still owes a fuller remembrance to the hands that made that pot worth fighting over. Number 10. Whole hog barbecue. Before the smell of barbecue became a sign of joyful summer weekends, people were already standing over smoking pits through the night so others could wake up and claim the feast. Lewis Hughes, who had lived through slavery, remembered 4th of July barbecues as rare occasions filled with food, music, and gathering. Children collected wood, adults watched the pits, and crowds ate meat produced through hours of largely unseen labor. After emancipation, black pitmasters carried that knowledge into churches, fairs, railroad stops, and growing communities. Whole hog barbecue became a symbol of Southern pride, then entered restaurants, competitions, and a massive commercial industry. Subscribe to Hidden Black Chronicles and help carry these stories forward with the dignity, gratitude, and truth they have long deserved today.